everybody. My name is Abby, and I'm an AmeriCorps member serving at the Lake County Conservation District. And welcome to our third annual Conservation Speaker Series. This year's theme is Living with Wildlife, and tonight is just part one of our three-part speaker series over the next few months. If you want to stay informed about the next speaker dates or any of our other programs, like our Pollinator Initiative, where we give out free seed to our community members, please feel free to sign up for our newsletter, which I'm going to share now in the chat box. Also in this form, if you love the speaker series, feel free to make a suggestion for next year's topic. If you're already signed up for the newsletter, you don't have to sign up again, but you can also make a suggestion there. And without further ado, we would love to welcome our first speaker, wildlife biologist Kari Eneas. Kari has worked with the SKT Tribal Wildlife Management Program since 2008 on a number of projects, and just recently graduated with her master's in wildlife biology. Tonight, Kari is going to talk about understanding why grizzly bears do what they do on the land and how we can prevent future conflicts with them. Kari will be taking some questions at the end, so if you have any questions throughout the duration of the evening, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box on your screen. So that'll be on either side of the raise hand button, and we'll answer them then. So Kari, if you are ready, feel free to take it away.
Excellent, thank you, Abby. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. All right, are you guys looking at a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, it's full screen. It looks great.
Okay, perfect. Oh, let me try and toggle this. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here tonight and really excited to be live streaming at the brewery there in Ronan. I think, man, this technology is just opening up so many opportunities, and I think this is really sweet. Before we get into our talk this evening, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself and a little bit about the agency that I work for. So again, my name is Kari, and I'm employed with the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes. Again, as was mentioned earlier, I'm a wildlife biologist. And last spring, I did finish my master's thesis in grizzly bear resource selection. And I'm going to touch a little bit more on that later in our talk tonight. But I wanted to share kind of my overall experience and expertise with wildlife. So since beginning with the program, my colleagues and I have monitored wildlife movements and the use of crossing structures across Highway 93. I've also studied barn owl nesting on the reservation and compared their diets to other owl species that we have here locally as well. I've also helped monitor populations of our larger ungulates and indexed water levels of prairie pothole wetlands, sort of in that Nine Pipes and Kicking Horse Reservoir area there. And what this does is it helps keep track of waterfowl brooding success each year and also helps to monitor local waterfowl populations. Each year, I also contribute to some long-term data sets in order to help with monitoring both resident and migrant bird species. These are all the birds that would come back in the spring, and then also our birds that kind of reside here all throughout the year. So before COVID kind of interrupted a lot of outdoor and public meetings, I spent a fair amount of time working with local schools, providing presentations on wildlife and their ecology. And I had also recently begun hosting public presentations on bear awareness and carnivore safety. And so I'm really excited to be here tonight as a guest speaker for the Lake County Conservation District's Living with Wildlife series. Most recently, I've been working to reduce grizzly bear conflicts in the Mission Valley. And this allows me to work directly with landowners and members of the public to provide innovative solutions to keep people safe, to keep livestock safe, and also to keep bears out of trouble. And when I'm not working, I spend even more time playing outside, hiking and paddleboarding with these two. I work for the tribe's wildlife management program, which is just one of 3 programs housed in our Division of Fish, Wildlife, and Recreation Conservation. All of these programs, along with many others, are nested under the tribe's Natural Resources Department. The reservation and its boundaries were established in 1855 under the Hellgate Treaty Act. In this treaty, specific language was included to preserve the rights of the Salish, Ponderay, and the Kootenai people to hunt and fish, as well as collect and gather other culturally important foods on the reservation and in Aboriginal territories. CSKT was the first tribal nation to designate a wilderness area within its borders. Our cultural ties to this place and its natural resources prompted early leaders of the tribes to preserve these natural spaces that were important to wildlife and plants, crucial to food sovereignty and tribal subsistence living. Within that wilderness area, there's a seasonal grizzly bear conservation area. And this was established, which is designated kind of there in the red box. And so what this was is every year we have a migration of army cutworm moths and ladybug beetles that bring large numbers of these insects to McDonald Peak each year. And so grizzly bears will gather in really high numbers in these areas in order to take advantage of that high calorie food source. So during July 15th to October 15th of each year, we enact a temporary closure in that area to human recreation within that conservation unit to prevent conflicts with grizzly bears, but most importantly, to keep people safe. And the tribes also designated an elk management area known as Ferry Basin in order to improve local herd populations. Early operations of Kerr Dam altered the riparian vegetation and landscapes along the river corridors. And so a settlement was reached in order to purchase lands elsewhere on the reservation that were used to restore and manage habitat for wildlife and for human recreation in order to replace the habitat that was lost during along the river corridor there. And these wildlife mitigation areas are designated by these habitat signs. So if you're out walking around, you'll come across these signs, and all that means is that that land is being protected and rehabilitated for wildlife use. Recreational use is welcome to everyone by walk-in access, though we don't allow motorized vehicles on any of these areas in order to prevent habitat degradation and to promote wildlife health. Many of these restored and protected drainages are also important grizzly bear corridors as well. And we have many carnivore species that can be found here on the reservation, which encompasses about 1.3 million acres. Each carnivore species has a specific purpose and role in traditional culture for the Salish, Ponderay, and Kootenai. Mountain lions are common, solitary carnivores that are typically found in forested habitats. Many places on the reservation are named after Kootenai stories of this cat. Wolves live in packs and are habitat generalists, which mean that they can thrive in many different habitat types. Culturally, these animals were seen as keepers of the health of the land, and the wolf is also an important teacher to the tribes in family relationships. Though their fur doesn't change color, different color morphs of the red fox can range from commonly thought of red to black or even silver in appearance. And in traditional creation stories, the fox had the power to bring back his mischievous brother, the coyote. Preferring prairies and open landscapes, the coyote was a main figure in traditional creation stories, and there was always a law or a lesson to be learned from his mischievous behaviors. And also, both black and grizzly bears can be found on the Flathead Indian Reservation. As omnivores, their diets range from fruits, vegetation, insects, and even meat. Considered to be the chief and the strongest of the animals, the grizzly bear played a spiritual role in many of the tribe's creation stories. It was the grizzly who led the other animals in creating the world and the environment for humans to live in, and they also showed people which plants to harvest. In today's environment, adapting and learning to live peaceably with wildlife, including the grizzly bear, has become vitally important to maintaining healthy wildlife populations. And understanding the history and ecology of these species can give us insights into how we might better coexist with them. And with that, let's start talking about grizzlies. When we look at the history of a species like the grizzly, we begin to understand the importance of this human and wildlife conflict. They crossed over to North America about 60,000 years ago over the Beringia land bridge. And they evolved in the Alaskan tundra, which is an environment relatively without trees. And this accounts for some of the behavioral differences that we even see here today between grizzly bears and black bears. In the face of danger, or when threatened, black bears had the option to retreat and to send their cubs up into trees. But because grizzlies evolved in areas without them, or without trees, they developed the response of standing their ground to protect their young. And about 26,000 years ago, grizzlies expanded down into the Rockies. Being a highly adaptable species, they can survive in habitats like the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, where they're feeding primarily on roots, plants, and small mammals. They can also thrive in areas along the Pacific Rim, where their diets consist of salmon and other protein-rich foods. And because of this, they can vary in sizes from about 200 to 300 pounds in the desert, or reach up to 2 to 3 times that size in other environments. But most importantly, they can adapt to us, and our actions can influence the behaviors of these bears, like in this picture here, where the bears have been completely habituated to human trash as a food resource. And so when encounters between carnivores, garbage, livestock, and humans result in conflict, the safety of both wildlife and humans can be at risk. While conflict can be broadly defined as a serious disagreement that results in incompatibility, as wildlife researchers and managers, we're usually interested in how conflict pertains to wildlife, more specifically, human and wildlife conflict. And because the threat isn't only on animals, we can also think of this conflict in two ways. We focus either on the negative interactions that humans have on wildlife. These could be things like habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, or various forms of human activity. But we can also think of this conflict as the negative interaction that wildlife have on people and our resources. These could be things such as crop raiding, human safety, or agricultural depredation. And that leads us to the question, what is the big concern with conflict? A long history of conflict exists between humans and grizzlies. Following region-wide population declines, the grizzly bear was listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act in 1975. Distribution had been reduced to less than 2% of historical ranges in the lower 48 states. And this map here shows that historic distribution there in the olive green and their current range there in the orange. And these declines were due largely to habitat loss and to conflicts between humans and bears. Under the Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan, which was part of the Endangered Species Act, recovery areas were established in roadless and undisturbed lands that were protected, or in areas where bears still persisted. And here in this map, we can see those 6 designated recovery zones. Locally, we are located in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, which is here in the red. Populations have increased in numbers and in range. Early studies estimated about 300 bears in this ecosystem at the time that they were listed. And recent estimations put the population around 1,000 bears in the entire NCDE. And as these populations recover and expand their range, bears are traveling farther from protected and public places into private and agricultural lands. Just for a bit of reference, the Mission Mountains are part of the NCDE. And our population of bears are important because of where we are located. Even though numbers of bears have increased in the NCDE and even in the greater Yellowstone ecosystems, recovery of the grizzly bear as a species depends on connectivity between all 6 of these recovery zones. And we're positioned right here on these corridors or those pathways between other recovery zones like the Selway Bitterroot and down into greater Yellowstone. And grizzly bears are naturally beginning to travel between these new areas. And this expansion increases contact between humans and bears. Because of this, it is really important that our communities here do everything that we can to prevent bears from developing bad behaviors before they move into areas that haven't had grizzlies in decades. And because that contact has the potential to become conflict. And here in the Mission Valley, important food sources for bears are plants, insects, and fruit. Most of these foods are found in those riparian areas, that vegetation along creeks and streams and wetlands. And so these habitats also provide hiding cover in an otherwise open landscape. So bears tend to use these corridors as they move across the valley. But people also use and build homes in these areas. The average distance of a residential home site to the nearest stream or creek or wetland in the valley is about 300 meters. And so when you factor in that grizzlies are strongly tied to and typically found along streams and rivers, you can begin to see how unsecured attractants can increase the potential for conflict. While grizzlies typically eat plants and fruit, they are omnivorous and can incorporate meat into their diets for protein. Animal matter is higher in energy and more digestible than sedges and berries. And though not always, these sources may be sought after to increase body mass for winter hibernation. And while bears don't distinguish between wild and domestic animal protein, or our garbages, the resurgence of small farms have created a landscape ripe for conflicts throughout the entire NCDE. So recent changes in funding for pivot irrigation systems has allowed for the farming of crops that weren't traditionally grown in the area. We're also starting to see longer growing seasons that make this available as well. And so, for example, we have large acres of land that are being transitioned into fields of corn, which attract bears. And small livestock are also being raised next to homes or in our backyards in both urban and rural environments, both of which have contributed to recent surges of grizzly bear conflict. And conflict can be costly, both to wildlife and to management agencies. Once a bear learns to depredate livestock, management actions may include translocations, where they're captured and relocated into a new area. And a single bear may be relocated more than once because bears often return to the same site or continue to cause trouble where they are released. Once they learn this behavior, it is really difficult for them to unlearn it. And it can also take many trapping nights to capture a single conflict bear, which can tie up management agencies. And if bears are repeatedly managed for conflict, management may include lethal actions. Since 2010, tribal biologists with the tribes here have captured or handled over 30 bears due to conflict and depredations of small livestock. And of those 30 bears, 20 had been lethally, or over 20 had been lethally removed or transported to zoos due to those livestock encounters. And so balancing this protection between livestock and bears has been a challenge. Finding effective methods to reduce levels of conflict might improve local attitudes towards bears and their conservation. And because they have excellent senses of smell, bears are particularly good at seeking out domestic food sources. And so some additional and commonly overlooked attractants that we might not think of right away around the house might include our garbage, a recently used barbecue or grill. If we have chickens or goats, small things like that in our yards, that can definitely draw in carnivores, fruit trees as they kind of ripen and start falling off the trees. That'll bring deer into our yard. It'll also bring in bears. Here in the Mission Valley, orchards and apples attribute to a large part of bears' diets. Also, if you have livestock food, calf creep or grain, other things like that, or pet food out on the porches, those can attract bears or other carnivores into our yards as well. And also beehives and bird feeders. And so all of these can attract bears. And once a bear finds an easy meal in a particular location, they will return to that spot again and again, seeking that food reward. And because this pattern is really hard to break, even with hazing and relocation, habituation to domestic foods often leads to property damage and a carnivore's death. And so the prevention of a bear becoming used to their domestic, or becoming used to people food, is the only real current solution that we have to their survival. And that requires all of our cooperation and diligence. And there are many things that we can do as Mission Valley residents that have been proven effective at reducing the amount of conflicts and preventing this behavior of bears becoming habituated. And so some of these preventative measures can include using bear-resistant trash bins. If you are on a route where your trash is collected every week, Republic Services they do offer Kodiak bear-resistant cans. If you have chicken coops or other smaller livestock, if you have a pen that has livestock food in it, those things are good to kind of protect with an electrified fence. Even if you put food in a smaller shed, if you just run a electric fence around that shed, it'll prevent them from ripping off doors or breaking in windows to get to livestock food as well. Removal of carcasses of larger livestock to safe distances from homes helps prevent drawing them into areas that are around other livestock that could get them in trouble. And then the use of livestock guardian dogs is something that's really been becoming more popular, and that reduces depredation of sheep and other small livestock. And so you can see on each one of these boxes that these tools can also prevent conflicts with other carnivore species that we have locally too, like wolves and mountain lions. And so you can also secure gardens. Gardens can attract bears into at certain times of the season, so putting electric fences around those. Harvesting our fruit. If we have fruit trees in our yard that we don't use the fruit on, sometimes that will draw bears into the yard, and so harvesting that fruit before or as it ripens, or put electric fences around kind of our smaller orchards to keep bears out. They do also damage the trees sometimes. And then keeping human and pet foods kind of in stored and secured locations. And so sometimes though, even if you've taken all of these necessary preventative actions, you might still be visited by the occasional bear. And there are some actions that you can take to deter them, to encourage them to leave your property as well. And so if the animal isn't necessarily causing harm or threatening safety, the aim is to make that carnivore's experience as on your property as uninviting as possible. And so some things that you can do if you do have carnivore on your property, you can use audio deterrents. These are things like loud alarms or an air horn, anything that will really startle the animal, and it's usually enough to kind of drive them off your property. Scare devices, a lot of times when we are working conflicts, we'll use something called a critter getter, and it's a combination of like a flashing light and large sirens that when triggered by motion, it kind of is a device that works well in kind of situations where we don't have time to get an electric fence set up right away. Sometimes if you have a shed or a coop and you leave a radio inside with a talk show radio station in a shed or a garage, that will deter carnivores kind of from lingering in an area, just kind of the human voice. And then if you have an old kind of coffee tin, those ones that used to be made out of tin, if you place a firecracker inside of those, that will amplify the sound and kind of work similarly to an air horn, just that loud audio deterrent kind of will help encourage them to move on. But remember that if a bear is causing harm to property or posing a threat to safety or livestock or your pets, that you should call tribal authorities or call this number here. On the reservation, we have a 24-hour wildlife conflict call line. So that number is here on the screen. Definitely give that number a call, and you'll be you will be reported, or your issue will be reported to a game warden on duty, and they will respond right away. Let's see, if wolves or mountain lions are caught in the act of pursuing, harassing livestock, or threatening human safety, they can be shot in self-defense. Though if that is the case, then it is important to call that conflict call line right away and to report the incident so that the wardens can come out and kind of take care of everything else on the scene for you. But unlike with mountain lions and wolves, there is no legal take or killing of a grizzly bear. And so if a grizzly is caught in the act of pursuing or harassing livestock, that you need to call that conflict call line number right away. And then a tribal manager will respond and safely and legally remove that animal. And so if there is, in the event of a conflict with a bear, like if your coop is broken into overnight or something, it's important to call that conflict call number right away to report that incident so that managers can respond right away to determine the identity of the animal that caused the conflict. Because a lot of times if too much time is left in between, new animals move into the site and you can't tell which one caused the conflict. And so as human populations continue to grow in the NCDE, conflict and this livestock depredation by bears will continue to increase. And so to better understand this problem, it's important to understand how bears are using the habitat. And so as mentioned earlier, grizzlies evolved in treeless environments. And so that means that locally, they were valley bottom bears. And that distinctive hump between their shoulder is a specialized muscle that they use to overturn large boulders and logs. And their 2 to 4 inch long claws, which are longer than black bear claws, are designed for digging ant piles, roots, and bulbs of plants. So a recent study here in the valley found that grizzlies are strongly tied to streams and rivers. And when compared to other environmental factors, the habitat selection by our bears were strongest for these riparian areas. And this is most likely due to natural foods in these corridors, through various fruits and plants like serviceberry, chokecherry, cow parsnip, and various sedges that grow along those streams and wetlands. And riparian areas also provide visual and thermal cover for bears during hot summer days. You can often identify wildlife travel corridors by following riparian corridors across the valley. And so this often dense cover allows them to move across the landscape unnoticed by humans or other predators. And through habitat modeling, we were able to determine that grizzly bears were not searching for garbage or livestock on the landscape for food, but rather that they were just opportunistically coming across them as they were following these food resources along those natural riparian corridors. And so let's just take a closer look at the Mission Valley. Many reservation residents associate bears with living in the mountains and don't necessarily think of them down here in the valleys. And as a result, precautions against bear conflicts are often not taken because bears aren't often seen in the valley. However, when we look at how bears are actually using the valley, we can see that they extensively use these riparian corridors to navigate the landscape. And so they're navigating through the landscape, usually completely unnoticed. And so bears are most active during the night, and so they will venture farther from these riparian zones when it's dark. But even though we might not see bears in the valley, it is important to secure our attractants and to protect small livestock with electric fencing to keep these bears from learning bad behaviors and prevent them from hanging out near homes. And the population for Lake County has been increasing about 2 to 3% each year. This last year, we saw a lot of new residents moving into the valley, and this usually means more development, more houses, but it also means new residents that are potentially unfamiliar living with wildlife species like the grizzly bear. And so this highlights the importance of outreach programs like this to connect residents with resources to living with wildlife. And to emphasize the importance for each of us to utilize prevention tools on our properties to reduce these conflicts, this map here shows the density of residential homes in just a small area of the valley. And I'll just throw some livestock, some sites with livestock in there, mostly chickens, goats, and pigs. And then here we see bears using habitat next to home sites and livestock. And looking at this photo, it's easy to see the potential for conflict. But what's also important to note here is that none of these bears got into any conflict at all. And so the possibilities of coexisting with these bears is happening right now, and that's really exciting. And many of these bears stay out of trouble and go completely unnoticed. But all it takes to turn a bear into a conflict bear is one encounter with an unprotected chicken coop or garbage can. And livestock depredation or getting into garbage is a behavior that is really difficult for a bear to unlearn. And so now that we know how bears are using these corridors in the valley, let's talk about how effective electric fences are at preventing conflict with livestock. Properly designed electric fences have been used to deter bears from beehives, garbage, and small livestock. And when an animal touches an electrified fence, that electric current passes through the animal into the ground and back to the energizer through the ground. And it's this completed circuit that results in the animal being shocked. A study conducted in the Mission Valley found that small livestock protected by properly functioning electrified fences were 100% effective at preventing a grizzly bear from getting into conflict. And there are a few specifications that are necessary for a fence to deter a grizzly bear. And so if you are thinking of using electric fences, be sure to contact us or to visit our website to download a guide on how to build an electric fence against bears. And if you're at the brewery, there are some pamphlets there as well about a hand guide or a Living with Wild Carnivores handbook. And then this electric fencing guide is available there as well. However, that same study found that conflict was 50% more likely to occur at a site without an electric fence around their small livestock. And so if you, you essentially have a 50% chance of having conflict at your coop if it is unfenced, or if it is unprotected with electric fence or some other means. And so you can see here that this bear in the video stopped to kind of check out what's kind of back behind that grass is a small goat pen, but she doesn't approach the fence because it is electrified. In the following sequence of video, she kind of gets back down and continues walking along the road, and no conflict is had there. One thing that we also found is that these electric fences also prevented conflicts by a variety of other local predator species like fox, raccoons, and even skunks. And so after all that, what does this mean for those of us who live in the Mission Valley and the greater NCDE with these bears? We've learned that grizzlies prefer habitat close to streams. And so on average, bears can be found within about 170 meters of riparian habitat. Now that's typically during the night or during the day. And so during the night, they do venture farther from these zones in order to forage and find food if they smell something, but usually they're kind of within that buffer there. But we also know that people live kind of in these areas as well. And so, and because bears have such an excellent sense of smell, any unsecured attractant near these riparian areas have a higher risk of causing conflict or livestock depredation with a grizzly bear. And so small livestock, what we found in our study that ended last year was that smaller livestock were raised in pretty close proximity to these wetland habitats as well. They averaged at about 230 meters away from riparian vegetations. And so what we also found is that sites where bears most often got into conflict with livestock were in this riparian area, almost essentially right overlapping where bears were using habitat. And so this highlights the importance of using preventative tools like electric fencing to protect livestock and garbage in these areas. And when turned on and functioning properly, electric fences do offer a non-lethal solution to the protection of garbage and small livestock in these riparian areas. And reducing depredation can help promote coexistence with bears on the reservation, which would allow tribal members to continue to honor their relationship with the species as well. And again, this all becomes really important when we start talking about the movement of bears between these populations and recovery zones. Bears have been identified in areas between the NCDE and the Yellowstone, and even down into the Bitterroot ecosystems as well. And these are areas that haven't had grizzlies on the landscape in many years. And so getting ahead of that conflict in these areas and in these communities will be important for gaining new and continued support for bear management. Working together and focusing on preventative measures can, like we discussed earlier, have in these areas along riparian can help reduce conflict. And so our wildlife program works hard to proactively prevent conflicts. And so we have a few different resource programs that help give people the tools that they need to keep their property and bears safe. So when recreating in any wildlife habitat in the missions or in the valley, it's strongly advised to have bear spray and to know how to use it. And so currently we offer any resident of the reservation purchasing a recreation, a fishing, or a camping permit from our office up here in Polson, the option to purchase a can of bear spray for only $10. This is a program that we started last year, and we're going to continue that into this year as well while supplies last. So if you're up here getting a permit for any reason, ask about this program, and we will get, hopefully we can get some bear spray to you. For residents that self-haul their garbage, we do offer a bear-resistant trash can loaner program. This is something we've done in the past, and it reduces conflicts by preventing bears from identifying trash as a food source in these sensitive and riparian areas. And so we will be offering this program again this summer. So be sure to keep an eye on our Facebook page or for further announcements on this program. And if you're interested in electric fencing, there are a few local cost share programs that will help you protect your livestock. They also help protect orchards or gardens as well. And so be sure to check out their websites or give me a call for a consult on the best, or for the best electric fencing solutions for your needs. Regulations in wilderness areas. And so to prevent attracting carnivores to your campsite, be sure to keep your camp as clean as possible. Burning plates or other garbage in the fire rings can attract late night visitors. And when possible, store all food, cooking equipment, pet food in bear-resistant storage containers. Hang them at the provided bear poles. And if none of those are present, storing them in metal-sided campers or vehicles as well. Just know that we do sometimes have bears break into vehicles. Another thing I want to highlight is that People and Carnivores, which is a local organization that protects carnivores through finding solutions that work for people and wildlife, they've also installed backcountry bear poles at some of the more popular trailheads and camping sites along the Mission Front. And so be sure to look for those out at McDonald Lake, Mission Reservoir, and Twin Lakes. And with that, I think I'm finished and can take some questions. I think I saw the question box blinking a few times.
Yeah, Kari, I can read them for you, or if
Perfect.
You want to open it yourself. Yeah, either way.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how I can do that without.
Oh, no worries. Here, I'll read them.
If you could read them, that would be excellent.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, before I read these, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time and presenting. That was wonderful. So Jerry has a question. He said there are a couple of bills regarding grizzlies and wolves and other predators being proposed in present Montana legislation session, I think recently. And I'm not privy to those, but I'm not sure if you know of them. And he was also wondering, do you or any other tribal members plan on testifying either in Helena, online, or on Zoom?
I personally haven't heard about or been kind of up to date on those either. Oh, I can read those. Let me just see. Oh, I'll leave that to this page. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. And thanks for bringing that up. I'll have to check those out. But at this other member or my boss or some other folks might also be more kind of on top of that than I would be. But yeah, I'll definitely make sure that that we look into those. And then I'll move down to Keaton. Roughly how much longer have black bears been native to the Mission Valley than grizzlies? And so grizzly bears have always resided here in the valley. We've always had both black bears and grizzly bears. And so one thing that was really unique about when our wilderness area was created was that it was one of those kind of strongholds for where grizzly bear populations had been persisting. We had a lot lower numbers then, but we have kind of the whole NCDE ecosystem has started to recover their populations. We've seen more bears here as well. And so typically, you know, black bears were more kind of mountainous bears, where grizzlies were kind of down in that valley bottom. I'll look down to Mary Ann. Does our department do site visits to make suggestions on fencing? So yes, if you do, and I will actually in the chat box right now, I meant to do this earlier. Oh, I don't know how. My chat box is gone. Wonder if I type an answer, can everybody see that? You know?
Give it a try, and we'll also, if it's easier to stop sharing your screen, that's also fine. Oh, yes, maybe that will help. Okay. Oh, there's the chat. Okay. So I will put my contact information when I'm done answering questions in that chat box. So if you do want someone to come and look at kind of your site and see what the best solution would be electric fence wise, I am the one who would come and do that. So I would love to get in touch with you. Let's see. Oh, where did all the old ones go? Where are good places to hike or pack with horses in the missions? That I don't know. I know a lot of people go up kind of the McDonald Lake way. I don't do a lot of packing into the missions, but that area I do kind of, when you're on the trail, see a lot of horse piles there. So that's probably a good one. I know some people go. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. Is there talk of creating buffer zones or barriers to funnel the bears directly through the travel corridors? No, and so one thing that's interesting when we talk about connectivity too is we have Highway 93 here that kind of runs kind of down the middle of the Mission Valley, and that is one of the most deadliest stretch of highways for grizzly bears kind of in the NCDE region. And so we do have an abnormally, when you look at all the miles of road, that 17-mile stretch of road there accounts for, oh, I can't remember, a high percentage of the grizzly bear highway mortalities. And so we do have crossing structures, wildlife crossing structures that go under the highway there that do sort of follow those riparian corridors. But for some reason, so we have males that will use the structure, but we have yet to see a female with cubs come under. And so we're currently in the middle of a project where we're looking at that to see whether there are some amenities we can do to the existing fences and structures that will make them more usable or attractive to females. So we do have some research going on to hopefully kind of address that, but yeah, hopefully that will help, because they are following those corridors right to the highway, but the females are climbing over the fence and over the highway instead of using the structures. So we're hoping to kind of amend that situation. Let's see, questions from the brewery. Why not burn your camp garbage? So that's a good question. So a lot of times if you have plates, paper plates, or kind of marshmallows, or, you know, things that you just kind of want to get rid of at the end of the night, that smell stays in the camp, or in the fire pit. And so what that will do, especially with bears, is burning plates or plastic forks, any of that kind of stuff, cans, pop cans, beer cans, that will draw them into your campground in search for that food. And so a lot of times they will search your fire pit for that food and not smell it. And then they will smell the remnants of your food, like either in your car, your crackers in your tent, that kind of stuff. And so it draws them into the area, and they
we're seeking food reward, and so they're going to continue to look for food in your campsite. So it's not a good idea to burn garbage in your campfire. And so how are rangers and conservationists working together? Are there many that are cooperating for predator conservation? And yes, so there's a lot of good going on. We do have local, a lot of local farmers and ranches that do utilize electric fencing. And so a big part of it is just getting the word out and having, you know, building more of those connections and working relationships with ranchers and landowners out there that are beneficial and that kind of showcase for surrounding, you know, neighbors that this is an effective tool. And yeah, a lot of times, yeah, I think we've had some good success that way with some homeowners. How many grizzlies are in the valley? So let's see, we don't have like excellent population estimates for the valley here. There have been population estimates for different regions in the NCDE. And so if you look at the Mission Valley, the Swan Valley, and the Bob Marshall, that kind of southeastern portion of that NCDE ecosystem, there are probably about 100 bears or so, but there's nothing like more local or specific. You know, I'd say 60 to 100 bears in that kind of lower ecosystem there. But we do have bears down in the valley, females typically down in, or what we see down here, we will see males occasionally, but let's see. We do have bears, females that will cross all the way over to Flathead River. So they'll be kind of over by the Bison Range and up. So they do kind of cover that whole, both east and west of the highway along the Mission Valley there. Regarding the 75 law about not shooting a bear, attacking livestock, what are the implications for a human being attacked? So that I believe is different. And I'm not 100% like clear cut on all of that, but yeah, definitely if something like that, you end up in a situation like that, you know, once you're able to call and things are kind of situated, just making sure that it's called and reported and can be investigated and then just shown that it was defensive. Let's see, questions from the brewery. What are thoughts on guardian dogs as bear deterrents? And are there any laws about shooting a bear, taking them down? So let's see. Black bears, I think you would be able to shoot if they were attacking a guardian dog, not, I don't think, a grizzly bear. And it's all kind of, things are always kind of in flux and changing, so I would have to double check on that. But yeah, I think that's kind of my understanding. And, you know, I have some friends that have guardian dogs and they like live in really wooded areas and they have protected their goats and their chickens from wolves and a black bear a couple of times. And so they are really effective. Even as younger pups, they're large dogs. They're really large. And so I think they are very effective. Let's see. Plans to discuss open limited hunting season for management on grizzly bears. So the answer to that is no, just because of culture, like on here on the reservation, culturally and traditionally grizzly bears were not harvested for food. And because they are such a high spiritual animal to traditionally, that it's not something that would be supported by the tribes. But I know there are discussions, I think, larger in Montana. So I'm not sure, that's all still kind of in flux as well and developing. During warm winters, are grizzlies active throughout the winters? So that is, yes, something I wanted to bring up that I forgot to. We are seeing with our lot milder winters than normal, bears are staying out a lot longer and the males are waking up a lot sooner. And so as long as, And this has been seen in sort of other parks in California for a few years. As long as a bear, a grizzly, can find food and continue to find sources of food, they won't hibernate. And so, I mean, they are still here, but we are noticing that bears are kind of down in the valley clear to the end of December, early January. And so they should be going up kind of that November-y time, but they are really staying out a lot longer. And the males are coming out in mid-March instead of April. And so we are seeing that change kind of occurring there with the different climate. Let's see. And in national parks and things where bears have access to garbage all year long, that has been a contributing factor to them not hibernating as well. And so that's another reason it's really important to keep them out of our garbages here so that they don't have access to that year-round food. Let's see, how many grizzlies are currently collared or tracked in the area? So that fluctuates. We do keep a collar on at least one bear kind of for monitoring and larger population trend studies. But for the study that we had a few years ago, we did have, I think, around six bears collared at one time, which is where most of the data that I showed you earlier was from. And is the research I was talking about being utilized in other bear zones to proactively avoid conflicts as they re-inhabit these, yes, coming into the new areas. And so that's the hope. So as bear managers, we're all kind of in contact with one another and kind of, especially that outreach and education component. There has been a lot of talk of getting ahead of these conflicts in these communities and utilizing some of these things that we've learned and that do work to kind of get people bear aware in these areas and to hopefully get ahead of some of the conflicts. Oh, what if guardian dogs kill the bear? And again, that would be the same kind of situation where you would just want to call that conflict call number right away, and then they'd come out and check that, or they'd come out and then just document it. We'd probably take the bear, and that would be a really good guardian dog.
Okay, great. Wow, thank you so much for that. And we do have a few questions that got asked in the regular chat box. One of them was, is it true we only have 1,400 grizzlies in the lower 48? Why can't we take more aggressive means to protect our bears and only allow so many homes, etc.?
Oh, so I don't think that 1,400 is correct. I know that kind of just between the Yellowstone and the NCDE, we would be above that figure there. But, and we do have bears kind of in some of those other zones that are, they're just on lower populations. But, you know, and I think it's just finding a balance between, you know, living on the landscape with these bears, and how do we do that in a way that, you know, allows people to be safe, allows their livelihoods to be secure, and, you know, also to live in a way that allows the bears to kind of have the resources that they need. And so it's a balancing act, really. And I think we are and have done really amazing and great things on that front. But I think a lot of it is just, you know, working together and building those relationships and just thinking outside the box in some instances. Let's see.
That's great. Another question that was in the other chat box is the bears that were relocated, where were they taken to? And do they start new populations at the new locations?
So that's a good clarification. So when I was talking about bears that we relocate, so those would be like bears that had gotten into trouble, maybe hanging out during the daytime when they shouldn't be too close to people, or maybe they had gotten into one chicken coop, but, you know, hadn't gotten into trouble before. Maybe they were just in garbage. So those bears, we do have areas in kind of designated release sites in remote kind of wilderness areas that we relocate them to. And so they aren't taken too far, and so one of the rules with grizzly bears is they are only ever released in areas that are already currently inhabited by grizzly bears. So they're never put into new areas that haven't been, that don't have established populations. And so, but the thing with bears too is that they travel very quickly over long distances. And so a lot of times the reason translocation isn't super effective is because you can take a problem bear, move him. We released a bear from the Blackfoot Reservation in like the southern part of the reservation. And then, you know, within a few days, she was back up in the area where she had originally been captured. And so they move around, and it's, you know, hard to, it's really hard for them to unlearn those behaviors once they learn them too.
Okay, great, thanks. And then I actually had a question myself. This might be the last question for you, is I know you were saying that the fences were 100% effective, which is fabulous, but I was wondering, not sure if there are any folks out there that maybe can't afford something like that. Like, what would your like second or third recommendation be? I know the guard dogs, they seemed pretty effective when you were chatting about it.
Yeah, and so that's a good question. So electric fences are the most effective measure, and there are programs out there that will help try to cost share some of that costs to make it more affordable. But one of the things that you can try to do if you can't afford an electric fence is, like, if you have chickens, to bring them into like one pen or enclosure, like a chicken coop, like a shed or something, to bring them in at night, somewhere where they're not kind of, you know, they can free range during the day, but they're brought into somewhere that can be more secured. And then if it does have like windows and the door, to put those sort of scare devices like a critter getter or something else that has that visual and audio stimulation, that could potentially, you know, it would deter a bear. It would get their attention for sure. I don't know in the long term how effective that would be if a bear kept coming back and would eventually potentially become accustomed to the flashing, if there wasn't sort of another kind of deterrent there. But that is something that could potentially help.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for that and all your questions. I just want to thank you so much again for your time and your knowledge. It was really wonderful to hear from you. And just for all the folks out there, we will be having another speaker series in February, the last Wednesday. And feel free to sign up for our newsletter. I'm going to put it in the chat box again, and you'll get more information from there. But Kari, thank you once again, and we'll be signing off here in just a bit.
Have a great one.
Yeah, thanks. You too.